My family told everyone I was a failure. I didn't argue, I just smiled and stayed quiet, sitting beside my sister's hospital bed. Then the nurse walked in, looked at me, and said respectfully, "Good afternoon, Chief of Surgery." My sister's jaw dropped, and my parents went completely pale. Imagine spending your entire life being told you're not good enough, a constant disappointment who would never truly measure up. Then, one day, in the most shocking and dramatic way possible, the truth, your undeniable success, slams into the faces of the very people who doubted you most. My family was about to learn who I really was, right there in a hospital room, while my sister lay in a bed, and a single nurse delivered the most shattering blow to their carefully constructed reality. "Hello, Chief of Surgery. My name is Samantha Mitchell, and at 34, I finally saw justice served." But to understand that moment, you have to go back to where it all began. My love affair with medicine started when I was just 7 years old. My grandfather needed heart surgery, and I remember clutching a children's book about the human body in the waiting room. When the surgeon came out, he seemed like a superhero in a white coat. In that instant, I knew I was going to be a doctor. "I'm going to be a doctor," I proudly declared on the car ride home. My dad, Richard Mitchell, glanced at me in the rearview mirror and chuckled. "That's a nice dream, Sammy, but it takes a special kind of person. It's very difficult." Beside me, my sister Emily, only 5, chirped, "I want to be a doctor, too." My mom, Diana, immediately reached back to pat Emily's knee. "Now I can see," she said. "You've got the brains for it, sweetheart." That was my first taste of the family dynamic that would define my entire childhood. Emily was the golden child, bright, charismatic, and, according to my parents, destined for greatness. I was the steady, reliable one who should set realistic goals. My dad, a business executive, valued status and appearances. He'd climbed from middle-class roots and was determined his family would reflect his success. My mom, a former beauty queen, had dreamed of modeling. Together, they created a world where achievements were measured by how impressive they sounded at cocktail parties. Emily learned to play to this audience. She was theatrical, always showcasing her accomplishments, and quick to excuse her failures. I was quieter, more determined, and completely uninterested in the spotlight, traits my parents interpreted as a lack of ambition. By the time I was 10, the pattern was set in stone. Emily's birthday parties were elaborate, with professional entertainers and custom cakes. Mine were afterthoughts, usually a store-bought cake and whatever gifts my parents had hastily grabbed. When I brought home straight A's in middle school, my dad would nod absently. "That's nice, Samantha." But when Emily pulled her grades up from C's to B's, they took her out for a special dinner to celebrate her remarkable improvement. I learned to find validation elsewhere. While my parents were at Emily's dance recitals and school plays, I buried myself in science books. I dissected frogs in the garage, conducted simple chemistry experiments, and watched medical documentaries when everyone else was asleep. I was building my foundation, brick by painstaking brick, even as my family assumed I was just passing time. My saving grace came in the form of Mr. Daniels, my high school biology teacher. One day, he caught me staying after class to examine slides under the microscope. "You've got a good eye," he said, peering over my shoulder. "And better technique than most of my senior students." It was the first time an adult had recognized my potential in the field I dreamed of entering. Mr. Daniels became my mentor, providing advanced reading materials and writing me a glowing recommendation for college. "You're going to make an exceptional doctor someday, Samantha," he told me when I was accepted to pre-med. "I'll be waiting for you to change the world." I nearly cried. Someone believed I could do it. At home, the response was predictably lukewarm. "Pre-med?" My father frowned at my acceptance letter. "That's a tough road, Samantha. Most pre-med students don't actually make it to medical school, right?" "I know, Dad," I replied, "but I'm going to be one of the ones who does." My mother interjected, "Well, at least you'll have a good education to fall back on when you decide on something more suitable." They agreed to pay for my education, but their subtle undermining never stopped. Every phone call included questions about whether I was still enjoying my classes, as if medicine were a phase. Every holiday break brought comments about how tired I looked, how maybe I was pushing myself too hard for something that might not be meant to be. Meanwhile, Emily soaked up the attention. If I mentioned an interesting lecture, she'd interrupt with a story about a party where she'd met the son of a hospital administrator. My parents would immediately pivot to her tale, visibly relieved to escape the boring details of my academic pursuits. By my senior year, I'd learned to keep my dreams close to my chest. I stopped sharing my achievements, my hopes, my plans. I built a private world where I could nurture my ambition without the constant weight of their doubt. The night before I left for college, I sat alone in our backyard, looking up at the stars. I made myself a promise. Someday I would be undeniable. Someday I would force them to see me. I just didn't know how many years and how much pain would pass before that day arrived. Getting accepted to Princeton's pre-med program should have been a cause for wild celebration. Instead, my parents' response was a mixture of surprise and concern. Princeton. My father raised his eyebrows. That's going to be expensive, Samantha. Are you sure this is the path you want to take? There's no shame in starting at community college if you're not completely certain. I am certain, I replied, clutching my acceptance letter. And I got a partial scholarship. Well, that helps, my mother said, though her tone suggested it didn't help enough. We just don't want you taking on debt for something that might not work out. They eventually covered what my scholarship didn't, but every tuition payment came with subtle reminders of their sacrifice and warnings about the path ahead. My father regularly sent me articles about the high dropout rate for pre-med students and the grueling lifestyle of medical residents. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that surprised even me. While other freshmen explored campus life, I established relationships with professors and secured research positions. I didn't mind missing parties. Each perfect exam score was its own reward. Each glowing evaluation from a professor was another brick in the foundation of my future. During my sophomore year, Emily announced she was also interested in pursuing medicine. Our parents' reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Like father, like daughter, my dad exclaimed, though he had never been in medicine. You've got the Mitchell determination. They never mentioned that I had blazed this trail first. When Emily was accepted to Rutgers with a modest scholarship, my parents threw her a lavish party, inviting extended family and friends. My uncle clapped me on the shoulder during the celebration. Looks like your little sister is following in your footsteps, he said. Maybe you two will open a practice together someday. My mother overheard and laughed. Oh, Samantha's still figuring things out. Emily's always known exactly what she wanted. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Visits home became increasingly difficult. Every achievement I mentioned was met with polite nods and quick changes of subject. When I was accepted into a competitive summer research program, my mother responded by showing me Emily's latest Instagram posts, where she was volunteering at a local clinic. She's already getting hands-on experience, my mother said proudly. She's always been so good with people. The implication was clear. Emily had natural talent, while I was just stubbornly pushing myself in a direction that didn't suit me. Thankfully, college provided me with something my home never had, genuine support. I found friends who shared my passion for medicine, who didn't think my dedication was strange or misguided. I met professors who recognized my potential and pushed me to reach even higher. Most importantly, I met Dr. Catherine Reynolds, a brilliant neurosurgeon who became my mentor during my junior year. She took me under her wing after I impressed her with a research paper on emerging surgical techniques. You have the mind of a surgeon, she told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings. Methodical, precise, and innovative. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. For the first time, I felt truly seen. Dr. Reynolds didn't just encourage my interest in surgery, she actively helped me prepare for it. She invited me to observe procedures, connected me with other medical professionals, and wrote a recommendation letter for medical school that brought tears to my eyes when she let me read it. You're not just going to be a doctor, Samantha, she said. You're going to be exceptional. I graduated summa cum laude with honors in my research thesis. This ceremony should have been one of the proudest days of my life. My parents attended, of course, but they seemed deeply uncomfortable during the department reception where my professors kept approaching them to sing my praises. "You must be incredibly proud," my advisor told them. "Samantha is one of the most promising students I've encountered in 20 years of teaching." "Yes, she's always been persistent," my father replied with a tight smile. Later that evening, as we gathered with extended family for dinner, my achievements were quickly glossed over in favor of Emily's news. She'd been elected president of her pre-med society. "A natural leader," my father toasted, raising his glass. "Always has been." I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion. In reality, I needed to escape before I said something I couldn't take back. As I lay in my childhood bed for one of the last times, I realized the distance between me and my family wasn't just emotional anymore. It was a fundamental disconnect in how we saw the world and my place in it. The next day, I packed up my car to move to New York for medical school. As I hugged my mother goodbye, she whispered, "It's still not too late to change your mind if it gets too difficult, sweetheart." I pulled away and looked her straight in the eyes. "It already is too difficult, Mom, but I'm doing it anyway." It was the closest I'd come to confrontation, and I saw the surprise on her face. But old habits die hard, and by evening, she'd called to tell me about a family friend's daughter who had dropped out of medical school and was much happier teaching high school biology. I let her words wash over me, no longer expecting anything different. The road ahead would be hard enough without carrying the weight of their doubt. From that day forward, I decided to stop seeking their approval and focus entirely on proving myself right. Medical school at Columbia was exactly as grueling as everyone said it would be, and exactly as fulfilling. I thrived under the pressure, the sleepless nights fueled by genuine passion rather than mere ambition. During my first year, I found myself drawn to cardiothoracic surgery, mesmerized by the complexity and precision it demanded. My residency at New York Presbyterian began with 80-hour work weeks that tested every limit I had. I learned to catch sleep in 15-minute increments, to perform complex procedures while fighting exhaustion, to make life-or-death decisions when my brain felt foggy with fatigue. But beneath the exhaustion was an exhilaration I couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't experienced it. Not that I tried to explain it to my family. Our phone calls had dwindled to brief, superficial exchanges that followed a predictable pattern. "How's the hospital?" my mother would ask, her tone suggesting I was engaged in some exotic, slightly concerning activity. "Busy, but good," I would reply, no longer bothering to share specific accomplishments. "You're working too hard," she would inevitably say. "You need to have a life outside of medicine." "Samantha, have you met anyone special?" The implication was always clear. My career was something I should be fitting around the real priorities of marriage and family, not the other way around. Meanwhile, Emily had dropped out of medical school during her second year. The story my parents circulated was that she had decided to pursue a more balanced lifestyle and was taking time to reevaluate her priorities. In reality, she'd failed several key courses and was asked to repeat the year, something I learned not from my family, but from a mutual acquaintance. My parents never mentioned Emily's academic struggles. Instead, they framed her decision as wise and self-aware. "Not everyone is cut out for that kind of stress," my father told relatives at Thanksgiving dinner. "Emily's smart enough to know what's right for her." When my aunt asked how I was doing in my residency, my mother jumped in before I could answer. "Samantha's still plugging away," she said with a sigh that conveyed both martyrdom and doubt. "We worry about her, of course. She's always been so intense." I excused myself to help in the kitchen, but not before hearing my father add, "The medical field has such a high burnout rate. We're just hoping she doesn't push herself too far before realizing it might not be the right fit." What hurt most wasn't their lack of faith. I'd grown accustomed to that. It was the active undermining of my reputation within our extended family and social circle. I discovered through cousins and family friends that my parents regularly described me as struggling and overwhelmed. When I received a prestigious residency award, they never mentioned it to anyone. When I was selected for a specialized surgical fellowship, they told relatives I was still in school. My Aunt Margaret, my father's sister, and the family truth-teller pulled me aside during a Christmas gathering. "They're telling everyone you're barely hanging on," she said bluntly. "Richard told the Petersons you were considering a less demanding specialty because you couldn't handle the pressure. Is that true?" "Absolutely not," I said, feeling a familiar knot of anger and hurt. "I'm actually excelling. My attending physicians have recommended me for advanced training in minimally invasive techniques." Margaret studied my face. "I thought so. Your parents have always had a strange blind spot when it comes to you, Samantha. I don't understand it, but I want you to know that not everyone in this family shares their perspective." Her words were a small comfort, but they couldn't erase the knowledge that my own parents were actively sabotaging my reputation. After that holiday, I made a difficult decision. I would stop sharing any career news with my family. The pain of having my accomplishments dismissed was bad enough. Knowing they were being twisted into failures was unbearable. I poured my energy into my work instead. During my 3rd year of residency, I contributed to a groundbreaking procedure that combined traditional surgical techniques with new imaging technology. The lead surgeon invited me to co-author a paper for the Journal of Cardiothoracic Surgery, my first major publication in a prestigious medical journal. When the article was published, my hospital held a small reception to celebrate. Colleagues and mentors congratulated me, acknowledging the significance of the achievement for someone at my career stage. Dr. Reynolds, who had stayed in touch throughout my training, sent flowers with a card that read, "The first of many. You're on your way." My parents didn't attend the reception. I hadn't invited them. When I mentioned the publication during our monthly phone call, my mother responded with, "That's nice, dear. Did I tell you Emily started her own wellness blog? She already has 500 followers." I began to distance myself from family gatherings, making excuses about work schedules and hospital commitments. The truth was, I could no longer bear to sit through hours of subtle digs and comparisons. Each interaction left me drained and doubting myself, emotions I couldn't afford in my demanding career. "You're never around anymore," my mother complained during one phone call. "Family should come first, Samantha." I wanted to ask when I had ever come first in their family, but I swallowed the words. "I'm building my career, Mom. It requires sacrifice." "Well, Emily manages to visit every Sunday for dinner, and she has her business to run," she replied. Emily's business was a part-time job at a wellness center, supplemented by an allowance from our parents. I bit my tongue again. The irony was that while my family continued to expect my failure, my professional reputation was soaring. Attending physicians requested me for complex cases. Fellows and residents sought my guidance. By the final year of my fellowship, I was already being courted by multiple hospitals for prestigious positions. I learned to build my own family out of colleagues and friends who understood my passion and respected my dedication. I found mentors who pushed me to reach further and peers who celebrated my successes without reservation. It wasn't the validation I had once craved from my parents, but it was genuine and based on my actual abilities rather than predetermined expectations. Still, in quiet moments, after successful surgeries or professional recognition, I sometimes found myself wishing my family could see who I had actually become, not who they had decided I was. That wish would soon be granted, in a way I never could have anticipated. By my early 30s, I had established myself as one of the rising stars in cardiothoracic surgery on the East Coast. My specialization in minimally invasive techniques had earned me recognition from industry leaders, and I had developed several procedural modifications that were being adopted by surgeons across the country. What no one in my family knew was that I had been approached by Massachusetts General Hospital with an unprecedented opportunity. They wanted me to consider the position of Chief of Surgery. At 34, I would be one of the youngest chiefs in the hospital's history and one of the few women to hold the position. The recruitment process was intense and highly confidential. I flew to Boston for a series of interviews, presented my vision for the department, and met with the hospital board. Throughout the process, I told no one in my family what was happening. Years of having my accomplishments diminished had taught me to protect my professional life from their influence. When the official offer came, I was sitting alone in my apartment overlooking Central Park. The email was followed by a phone call from the hospital director. "We believe you're the future of surgical medicine, Dr. Mitchell," he said. We want you to lead our team into that future. After accepting the position, I sat on my balcony with a glass of champagne, watching the sun set over the park. I had achieved something remarkable, something undeniable. Part of me wanted to call my parents, to finally force them to acknowledge my success, but a deeper wisdom held me back. This moment was mine to savor, untainted by their doubt or dismissal. I decided to wait until I was settled in the role before sharing the news. I would tell them in person, I thought, when the achievement was already established fact rather than future promise. Before I could make those plans, however, my family orchestrated one final episode of dismissal that sealed my decision to maintain my privacy. My parents had organized a family dinner to celebrate Emily's engagement to a wealthy real estate developer. I flew in for the weekend, genuinely happy for my sister despite our complicated relationship. The dinner was at an upscale restaurant, with extended family and friends gathered to toast the couple. I arrived slightly late due to a delayed flight and found the celebration already in full swing. My father was mid-speech, champagne flute raised. "We always knew Emily would find someone special," he was saying. "She's always had a gift for connecting with people, for knowing what she wants and going after it." I slipped into my seat quietly, nodding greetings to relatives as my father continued. "To Emily and James," he concluded, "you make us prouder than words can express." After the toast, my mother finally noticed my arrival. "Oh, Samantha, you made it. We were just about to order." No mention of my late arrival, no concern about my delayed flight. I was simply an afterthought. As usual, throughout dinner, Emily dominated the conversation with wedding plans and stories about how she and James met. My parents beamed with each detail, occasionally turning to other guests to add, "She's always had such clear vision about her life." When a cousin asked what I had been up to, my mother answered before I could. "Samantha's still at the hospital in New York. Still working those crazy hours." She shook her head slightly. "We keep telling her there's more to life than work, don't we, Richard? Some people take longer to find their path." My father agreed with a pointed glance at Emily's engagement ring. But better late than never. I felt something shift inside me. A final thread snapping, perhaps. I had been offered one of the most prestigious positions in my field, a role that surgeons twice my age would consider the pinnacle of their careers. And here I sat, being patronized as someone who hadn't yet found her path. Actually, I started to say, the announcement of my new position on the tip of my tongue. But Emily chose that moment to stand and tap her glass. "James and I have one more piece of news," she announced. "We're expecting. I'm going to be a mom." The table erupted in cheers and congratulations. My mother burst into tears of joy, and my father wrapped his arm around Emily's shoulders, pride radiating from every pore. In the commotion, no one noticed that I hadn't finished my sentence. No one cared what news I might have had to share. In that moment, I made my decision. They would learn about my achievement when they couldn't ignore or diminish it. The next morning, as I prepared to return to New York, my mother cornered me in the guest room. "You should learn from your sister, Samantha," she said, folding a towel that didn't need folding. "Emily understands what really matters in life. It's not too late for you to focus on building a family instead of just a career." I looked at her, this woman who had never seen me clearly, and felt a strange sense of peace. "I'm very happy with my life, Mom," I said simply. "Are you? You work all the time. You barely visit. You don't have a partner or children. That's not much of a life." I picked up my suitcase. "It's my life, and it's a good one." She shook her head, the familiar expression of disappointment settling on her features. "We just want what's best for you." "No," I replied quietly. "You want what you think is best for me. There's a difference." I left for the airport shortly after, returning to New York to prepare for my move to Boston. 2 weeks later, I started my new position as Chief of Surgery at Massachusetts General. The hospital held a reception to welcome me, attended by some of the most respected names in medicine. My office had a view of the Charles River and a door with my name and title displayed in elegant lettering. I sent no pictures home. I made no announcements to my family. This achievement was still mine alone, protected from their diminishment. I would tell them eventually, I thought, when the moment was right. As it turned out, the moment would choose itself. in circumstances I could never have predicted. I was in the middle of a department budget meeting when my assistant knocked urgently on the conference room door. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is an emergency call for you," she said. "It's about your sister." My heart dropped as I excused myself. In the hallway, I took the call, hearing my mother's panicked voice on the other end. "Emily's been taken to the hospital," she sobbed. "She collapsed at home. The baby, they're not sure. We're heading to Massachusetts General now. The ambulance is taking her there." The irony wasn't lost on me. Of all the hospitals in Boston, my sister was being brought to mine. I assured my mother I would meet them there and hurried to the emergency department. By the time I arrived, Emily had already been admitted and moved to the high-risk obstetrics floor. I checked the system and saw that she was being treated for severe preeclampsia, a serious but manageable condition if caught in time. Relief washed over me. This was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. I made my way to her room, still dressed in my professional attire, but without my white coat or identification badge. As I approached, I could hear my mother's voice through the partially open door. "I don't understand why they're making us wait so long," she was saying. "The doctor should have been here by now." I took a deep breath and entered the room. Emily was in the hospital bed, looking pale but stable. My father stood by the window while my mother sat at Emily's bedside, clutching her hand. All three looked up as I walked in, but their expressions showed only mild acknowledgement. No relief, no gratitude for my quick arrival. Finally, my mother said, though I had arrived less than 20 minutes after their call, "Have you spoken to the doctors? Do you know what's happening?" "I just got here, Mom," I replied, moving to Emily's other side. "How are you feeling?" Emily gave a dramatic sigh. "Terrible. They said my blood pressure is dangerously high. They're worried about the baby." I nodded. "Preeclampsia can be serious, but you're in the right place. Massachusetts General has an excellent maternal-fetal medicine team." My father turned from the window with a frown. "And how would you know that?" "You work in New York." The perfect opening to explain my new position, but something held me back. The familiar dismissive tone. The automatic assumption that I couldn't possibly know what I was talking about. Old patterns reasserting themselves even in crisis. "I keep up with hospital rankings," I said simply, deciding this wasn't the moment for revelations. Emily's health was the priority. My mother made a small noise of disapproval. "Well, I hope they send someone experienced to look after Emily. She needs the best care possible." "I'm sure they'll send someone very qualified," I replied, biting back the urge to tell her that as chief of surgery, I could personally ensure it. The next hour passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Emily's occasional complaints about her condition and my mother's fussing. When I offered to get more information about the treatment plan, my father waved me off. The nurse said the doctor would be here soon. "We don't need you running around asking questions and getting in the way." I sat down in the corner chair, observing the family dynamic as if from a distance. Even here, in a medical crisis, in a hospital where I held the highest surgical position, I was still the outsider. The irony was almost laughable. My mother continued to make pointed comments about how some people were too busy with work to care about family, even as I sat right there, having dropped everything to be with them. My father checked his watch repeatedly, muttering about the inefficiency of hospital staff. Emily alternated between tearful worries about the baby and complaints about the uncomfortable bed and bland hospital food. Not once did anyone ask about my life, my work, or express genuine pleasure that I was there. I was simply expected to be present, but invisible, supportive, but silent. As the afternoon wore on, my father stepped out to make some business calls. My mother took the opportunity to lean closer to Emily's bed. "At least this might help Samantha understand what she's missing," she said in a stage whisper. "All that focus on career, and look at what really matters in the end. Family." I remained silent, watching Emily nod in agreement. Both of them seemingly forgetting that my career was dedicated to saving lives, including potentially Emily's and her baby's. The tension in the room was palpable when a nurse finally entered. She was carrying a tablet and checking Emily's vital signs when she glanced up and noticed me sitting quietly in the corner. Her eyes widened in recognition, and I gave a small shake of my head, hoping she would understand my silent request for discretion. The nurse turned back to Emily. The attending physician will be here shortly to discuss your treatment plan. We're monitoring your blood pressure closely, and so far the baby's heartbeat remains strong. It's about time, my mother huffed. We've been waiting for hours, actually. It's been approximately 70 minutes since admission, the nurse corrected politely. Dr. Bennett is one of our top maternal fetal specialists. My mother sniffed, unimpressed. My silent vigil continued, a strange calm settling over me as I waited for the inevitable moment when worlds would collide, when my professional identity would crash into my family's perception of me. That moment was coming sooner than any of us knew. The door to Emily's hospital room swung open and Nurse Jackson returned, this time accompanied by a young resident I recognized as Dr. Patel from the obstetrics department. They were checking Emily's chart when Nurse Jackson glanced up and saw me again. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The nurse straightened her posture, a look of professional respect replacing her earlier casual demeanor. She stepped away from Emily's bed and walked directly toward me, stopping a respectful distance away. Then, to the astonishment of everyone in the room, she gave a slight, deferential bow. "Hello, Chief of Surgery," she said clearly. "I didn't realize you were already here with the patient. Dr. Bennett is on her way to consult." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the mental gears turning as my family processed what they just heard. Emily's mouth fell open, her usual dramatic flair failing her in genuine shock. My father, who had just returned from making his calls, froze in the doorway, his phone still in his hand. My mother looked from the nurse to me and back again, her expression shifting from confusion to utter disbelief. "There must be some mistake," she finally said with a nervous laugh. "My daughter works at a hospital in New York." "She's not, she can't be." Nurse Jackson looked confused. "Dr. Samantha Mitchell has been our chief of surgery for the past 3 months, she stated matter-of-factly. One of the youngest chiefs in the hospital's history. All eyes turned to me. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my silk blouse. "Thank you, Nurse Jackson," I said calmly. "Yes, I am familiar with the case. Dr. Bennett is exactly who my sister needs to see right now." The nurse nodded professionally, though I could see the questions in her eyes. Dr. Patel looked equally confused, but maintained his professional composure. "We'll continue monitoring Mrs. Collins's blood pressure," he said, using Emily's married name. "The latest readings show it's still elevated, but has stabilized somewhat since admission." "Good," I replied. "Please keep me updated on any changes." As the medical staff turned their attention back to Emily, I watched my family's reactions unfold. Emily's shock had morphed into something more complex, a mixture of surprise, confusion, and what looked almost like betrayal, as if my success were somehow an act of aggression against her. My father had moved from the doorway to stand beside my mother, his expression hardening into something defensive. My mother simply stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "Chief of Surgery," she finally whispered. "But you never said anything. Would it have mattered if I had?" I asked quietly. Before she could answer, the door opened again and Dr. Bennett entered. She was one of our most respected specialists, a woman in her 50s with a commanding presence and exceptional clinical skills. She spotted me immediately. "Dr. Mitchell," she said with genuine warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here today." "Family emergency," I explained. "This is my sister, Emily Collins." Dr. Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly as she made the connection. "I see. Well, she's in good hands here." She turned to Emily with a reassuring smile. "Mrs. Collins, I've reviewed your case. The preeclampsia is concerning but manageable. We'll need to keep you hospitalized for monitoring until your blood pressure stabilizes." Emily, still processing the revelation about my position, simply nodded. "Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Bennett continued, addressing me professionally. "Based on the initial assessment, we're considering beginning magnesium sulfate as a precaution against seizures. Given your sister's current condition, would you concur?" The room seemed to hold its breath as Dr. Bennett deferred to my medical opinion, an unmistakable acknowledgement of my authority and expertise. Yes, I replied after a moment's consideration. That seems appropriate given the severity of her symptoms. I'd also suggest continuous fetal monitoring for the next 24 hours at minimum. Dr. Bennett nodded her agreement. Exactly what I was thinking. I'll order that right away. My father finally found his voice. Now wait just a minute, he interjected. Are you saying my daughter is making medical decisions about her sister? Isn't that some kind of conflict of interest? Dr. Bennett looked surprised. Mr. Mitchell, your daughter is one of the most respected surgeons in the country. While obstetrics isn't her specialty, her medical opinion is highly valued. However, I am the attending physician and will be making all final treatment decisions. She turned back to me. Will you be staying for the treatment discussion? Yes, I said, meeting my father's gaze steadily. I'd like to hear the full plan. As Dr. Bennett began explaining Emily's treatment in detail, other hospital staff filtered in and out of the room. Each one acknowledged me with the same respect, Dr. Mitchell, or Chief, creating an undeniable picture of my professional standing. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically silent, suddenly reached for my hand. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, her voice small. I gently withdrew my hand. When have you ever truly wanted to hear about my success, Mom? Her face flushed. That's not fair. We've always supported you. From the bed, Emily made a scoffing sound. All eyes turned to her. Oh, come on, she said, some of her usual dramatic flair returning. We all know Samantha was never the favorite. You guys made that pretty clear. My father stepped forward, his businessman instincts kicking in as he attempted damage control. Now's not the time for family drama, Emily. You need to focus on getting better. He turned to me with a stiff smile. Samantha, we've always been proud of you. You know that. We just worried about you working too hard. The practiced ease of his revisionist history was almost impressive. In any other circumstance, I might have let it pass, might have accepted this meager olive branch for the sake of peace. But standing in my hospital, surrounded by colleagues who respected me for exactly the qualities my family had always dismissed, I found I no longer needed to compromise. No, I said simply. You weren't proud of me. You were waiting for me to fail. Dr. Bennett, sensing the tension, tactfully excused herself. I'll check back in an hour. The nurse will start the magnesium sulfate immediately. As the door closed behind her, my father's facade cracked. That's ridiculous. We always supported your interests. My interests? I repeated. You mean my career? The one you told everyone was falling apart? The one Mom suggested I should abandon just yesterday to focus on building a family. My mother had the grace to look embarrassed. We didn't know you were so successful. That's exactly the point, I replied. You never asked. You never wanted to know. You decided years ago who I was and what I was capable of, and you never bothered to update that assessment, even when the evidence was right in front of you. Emily, never one to stay out of the spotlight for long, interjected. Well, you could have told us you were some big-shot doctor. It's not like we wouldn't have been happy for you. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt a surprising wave of compassion. Emily had been shaped by our parents' expectations just as much as I had, just in the opposite direction. She had been told she was exceptional for so long that she'd never had to prove it. What might she have accomplished if she'd been held to higher standards? I'm not some big-shot doctor, I said quietly. I'm chief of surgery at one of the country's top hospitals. I've published over 30 papers in major medical journals. I've developed surgical techniques that are being taught across the country. And none of you know any of that because none of you ever really wanted to know who I actually am. The silence that followed was profound. My father stared out the window, his jaw working. My mother twisted her wedding ring, tears welling in her eyes. Emily looked down at her hospital blanket, unusually subdued. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Dr. Patel returned with a nurse to begin Emily's treatment. As they set up the floor for the magnesium sulfate, I stepped back, watching my family process what had just happened. In that moment, standing in my hospital, watching my colleagues care for my sister, I realized I had finally achieved what I had promised myself under the stars all those years ago. I had become undeniable. Emily remained in the hospital for 5 days. Her condition stabilized, The baby was deemed healthy, and she was eventually discharged with instructions for careful monitoring throughout the remainder of her pregnancy. Throughout her stay, I visited daily, balancing my duties as chief of surgery with my role as her sister. The revelation of my position created a seismic shift in our family dynamic. Emily, surprisingly, was the first to adapt. On the third day of her hospitalization, as I checked in during my lunch break, she looked up from her magazine with unusual seriousness. "You must be really good," she said simply. "Everyone here practically genuflects when you walk in." I smiled slightly. "I work hard." "Yeah," she replied, studying me. "You always did." She hesitated, then added, "I was jealous of you, you know." This caught me off guard. "Jealous of me? Mom and Dad treated you like you hung the moon." Emily laughed without humor. "They did, and it was nice, I guess. But I always knew I wasn't earning it. You built something real, something they couldn't give you or take away." She rubbed her pregnant belly absently. "I never had that." It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had. As Emily's discharge approached, we began tentatively rebuilding our relationship, not as competitors in our parents' attention economy, but as adults with our own strengths and weaknesses. My parents' adjustment was more complicated. My father attempted to rewrite history, claiming he had always believed in me, but had simply been pushing me to excel with his tough love. My mother vacillated between pride in my accomplishments and hurt that I had kept them secret. "We're your family," she said during a private moment in my office, where she had asked to speak with me. "Families shouldn't have secrets. Families shouldn't make their children feel like they're constantly falling short, either," I replied gently. "Every time I achieved something, you found a way to diminish it." Eventually, I stopped sharing because it hurt too much. "We never meant to hurt you," she insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "We were just worried. Medicine is such a demanding field, and you are always so intense." "That intensity is what makes me good at my job, Mom. It's not a flaw to be corrected. It's a strength to be channeled." She nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure she truly understood. Old perceptions die hard, and my parents had spent decades viewing me through a particular lens. It would take time and consistent evidence to reshape their image of me. As weeks passed, I established clear boundaries. I declined their initial flood of invitations to family events, explaining that my schedule as chief of surgery was demanding and inflexible. When I did accept an invitation for Sunday dinner a month after Emily's hospitalization, I left when my father began introducing me to neighbors as "our daughter," the doctor, with the same tone he might have used for "our daughter," the circus performer. Technically accurate, but tinged with subtle disbelief. "I've worked hard to earn my position and the respect that comes with it," I explained as I collected my coat. "When you're ready to respect it, too, we can try this again." My Aunt Margaret called the next day. "Good for you," she said without preamble. "Richard's been getting away with that condescending attitude for years. It's about time someone called him on it." Gradually, tentatively, a new family dynamic began to emerge. My parents learned that my success wasn't a phase or a fluke, but a sustainable reality. Emily, to everyone's surprise, including possibly her own, developed a genuine interest in patient advocacy after her experience and began volunteering at a support group for high-risk pregnant women. 6 months after the incident, as my family now referred to it, I invited them to the hospital's annual fundraising gala. I was being honored for pioneering a new minimally invasive cardiac procedure, and I decided it was time for them to see me in my professional element. The evening was transformative. My parents watched as hospital board members, renowned physicians, and grateful patients approached me with genuine respect and admiration. They listened as the hospital director described my contributions to the field. They witnessed, perhaps for the first time, who I had become when they weren't looking. "I had no idea," my father said quietly as we stood at the reception afterward. "The way people talk about you, you're really changing lives." "That's why I do it, Dad," I replied. It was never about proving anything to anyone. It was about being who I was meant to be. He nodded, a complexity of emotions crossing his face. "I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." It wasn't a complete transformation. Decades of patterns don't disappear overnight. But it was a start. Over the following year, We began building a relationship based on who we actually were, not who they had decided I should be. I established a mentoring program for young surgeons facing similar challenges, particularly women and minorities who often struggled against others' limited perceptions of their potential. I shared my story openly with these protégés, emphasizing that external validation, even from those closest to us, can never replace self-belief. Your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it, I told a particularly promising resident who was facing skepticism from her family. Build your excellence brick by brick, day by day. Eventually, it becomes undeniable, even to those most committed to denying it. The greatest freedom I discovered came not from finally receiving my family's approval, but from no longer needing it. My confidence was built on a foundation of genuine achievement and impact, not on others' perceptions. The little girl who had once desperately sought validation had grown into a woman who created her own. Emily delivered a healthy baby boy 3 months after her hospitalization. At the family gathering to welcome him, she pulled me aside. "I want him to know his Aunt Samantha," she said, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I want him to know what it means to find your path and stick to it no matter what anyone says." I looked down at my nephew's tiny face. "I'd like that. And maybe someday," she added with a small smile, "you can explain to him what a cardiothoracic surgeon actually does, because I still have no idea." I laughed. A genuine laugh, free from the tension that had characterized our relationship for so long. It's a date. My journey from dismissed daughter to respected chief of surgery taught me that true validation can only come from within. External recognition, while satisfying, especially in those moments when my family finally saw me clearly, is ultimately fleeting. What endures is the knowledge that I built something meaningful, something that extends beyond myself to touch countless lives. If you're listening to this and feel unrecognized or underestimated by those who should believe in you most, know that your worth isn't diminished by their inability to see it. Build your excellence quietly if necessary, but build it nonetheless. Your success doesn't need their permission or acknowledgement to be real. The greatest revenge against doubt isn't proving others wrong. It's proving yourself right. Remember, sometimes the people who are meant to support us the most are the last to recognize our potential. Don't let that stop you from becoming exactly who you're meant to be.